By the 9 and 4, welcome to the library, my perceptive patrons, regular visitors, and new guests. I am the recorder, and in this entry we begin the first of what will most likely be several explorations and entries covering the Age of Valor. This age would see the many attempts of the Daemon Vanson to escape his confinement to once more conquer and rule Jam'mar. It would also see a series of heroes rise to counter these attempts, and their actions, choices, successes, and failures would shape all that has come after. There are many events and points of interest that happened during this age, and I will not have the time to go over each in fine detail, as this is, as always, just an overview of this age. We will cover most important events, of course, but even then some will only be a brief mention. Many of these events will receive their own entries in the future, going more in depth, as interest and time dictate. So, if there is a topic that piques your interest, make your curiosity known, and I will make sure to see that it is addressed in a future entry. To set the stage for our discussion, we should cover in brief the situation as it was at the beginning of what would be called the Age of Valor. For over 3,000 years, the world of Jam'mar had been in a state of slow and tentative reconstruction and rebuilding, as the ravages of the Daemon's reign were mended as was best able. The only glaring exception to this effort was the cursed, ever-shifting swamps of Fulgeria, where the taint of the demon was at its strongest, and beyond the ability of any to cleanse, merely contain. The elven nation of Avlin, along with Deepgate of the dwarven clans, were comfortably situated on the continent of Batonia, kept in contact with each other and in trade by the caravans of the halflings and gnomes. For the greater part of the age, Orckin, Scale-Blessed, and many other creatures of savage and hateful intent had been the focus of the various rangers and warriors of the elves and dwarves, each doing their best to keep major routes of travel safe and villages and hamlets secure. Most often they succeeded more than they failed, with the unavoidable exception sometimes costing the lives of a great many. The great trade city of Polaron on the eastern edge of the continent of Solaris served as a gateway to that great and mostly lawless and lost land, steeped in mystery and legends of pre-reign treasure and artifacts. The great military training city of Trennis sat along the northern edge on the coast of the continent, and still would accept paid-for students from any who could afford the fees, and transport the would-be trainees to their docks. Beyond these two cities, the rest of the continent of Solaris was seen generally as being overrun by goblins and all other manners of horrors, to include the greatest concentration of dragon clanholds known on the planet. The fact that the former capital of the flame-forged humans, Domnitra, was here hidden within the great forests, had been wiped from the histories and memories of Jam'mar by the Daemon's hatred for them during his purge of both the city and the bulk of the continent. The Dragwa at this time were an isolationist and xenophobic lot, yet the Isle of Mist was recognized not only as their home and sovereign territory, but as an essential part of international trade and shipping on Jam'mar, as it was the steady and very predictable course that the Isle of Mist traverses that allows ship to meet and make trades of goods that would otherwise take many more months or years of sail more. This was only possible by the simple fact that the Dragwa allowed settlements to be founded on the ends of each of the peninsulas that extended from the ring of mountains that surround the desert home of the Dragwa. Their reason for this seemingly strange act for a xenophobic and isolationist group? Simple. Access to the totality of goods that flowed from each nation and people to one another, as the home city asked only the first option to purchase any good from those traders and merchants that would be profiting so greatly from this arrangement. All secured by the Dragwa's mighty navy. The navy of the Dragwa at this point was uncontested as the mightiest on the planet in any sort of military measure. Some may be faster, particularly those ships of elven make, but none were tougher, and more importantly, the Dragwa were far more potent in close combat during boarding operations. Operations they could initiate without having first even grappled the target of their fury. This was possible by the magical rings that the sailors and warriors of the Dragwa Navy wore. These rings had two prominently known powers. First, they allowed one to cross water or any other liquid as if it were solid. This made the need to get close and engage in grappling actions unnecessary, as the Dragwa only need to get a few hundred yards from their target to allow boarding parties to be less than a minute's run away. After which, the second power of these rings is seen. The power to run along surfaces, counter to gravity's pull. This would see fully armed and armored squads of warriors flowing over the sides of ships, through open portholes and other breachable points along the ship's exterior. Combined with the simple fact that the Dragwa were designed as a weapon of war, and these were the very tools created for them to use in this aim. It is understandable why the rest of Jam'mar chose to honor the Dragwa's wishes, to remain left to their own devices in their own lands, in the face of such might. For the early half of the age, dragons, and their threat to any outlying or vulnerable populations, were a constant thorn in the side of the younger races and their attempts to recover from the reign. By the end of the age and the beginning of the time period of interest to us, however, this had been reduced from a threat almost constantly felt to a worrisome and possible, yet uncommon or rare event. This was both because many of the powers at the time were able to begin actively fighting back in greater force and numbers, as well as the actions of many heroic personages rising to the challenge. However, the single greatest action that led to this change would have to be the foundation of Dragon's Haven. Dragon's Haven was founded in the middling years of the age, originally as just a large outpost and castle on an island on the northern side of Solaris, and by age's end, and during the events of our focus, had become a massive outpost with a growing city forming outside of it to service and support these heroes of Jam'mar. The simple fact that nowhere outside the great capital cities was safer from dragon attack went far in encouraging such growth as well. However, even with the increased protection and defense of Dragon's Haven and the knights that based themselves there provided to the local area and the greater world, the skies were still the domain of dragons, and the few attempts to utilize airships or the like on any sort of scale ended with few, if any, survivors. Only short flights between nearby locations or around a major city were really even possible, and even with the lack of Chris-Tech solutions available at the time, there were still better and safer methods, costing mere coppers on the plat opposed to the creation and potential loss of a skyship and her crew. While dragonkind was a prevalent and constant threat, the other elder race of Jam'mar, the Analar, had, to most of the world, faded from existence, possibly having gone extinct. Few, if any, confirmed sightings of sky cities were recorded within the first 3 millennia of the age, and the few surviving colonists and hideouts of the ground-bound Analar, so reduced in power and numbers after the deadly centuries of the wars and the reign that followed, had endured and survived solely by escaping notice, and made no move to change this policy. To most, the Analar had died out in the fires of the reign, and if they had not, then they were to be feared or destroyed if possible, as their might and the danger they presented had not been forgotten, even if there were doubts to their current existence. The gods fulfilled prayers and bestowed miracles from their extraplanar places of power, rarely, if ever, manifesting in the mortal realm. They were distant, and only interfered rarely at best, and were abjectly apathetic to the adversities of their adherents at worst. Of course, there were exceptions, but in general, the gods helped only those who made themselves worthy of such aid. It should also be noted that while Christ was still a known and often used resource, at this time these uses almost entirely consisted as healing items. A steady trade in them had, as always, persisted, but only Polaron and the Dragois would be found to having those wanting and willing to purchase large quantities of Christ. As discussed in an earlier entry, at this point in time, Polaron had become the last remaining home to many of the great machines that produced the Christech that is such a common feature in the world and realms of Jam'mar. However, for many reasons, the view of the common folk was that these devices were simply normal magical items, like those seen to be crafted by any number of artificers across the world. The Dragois themselves had such machines tailored for their needs and left behind by the Analar that had created them. But these were totally geared to the intended use of the Dragois: war. As such, the products of these machines were overwhelmingly weapons and other forms of war gear and materiel, and most of it to sizes and dimensions that suited only the Dragois, limiting their value as exports. All in all, the waning years of the Age of Mortals, and as our story begins, the world of Jam'mar was a wild and untamed place, with many locales both safe and deadly to see and visit. Most of the great powers cooperated with each other less out of a desire to be unified, although that existed, and more out of simple convenience, for most of them had far too many issues within their own domains to begin engaging in inter-sovereign warfare or the like. Adventurers were the primary source of relief for many, and sometimes near constant flow of dangers and call for help. The Hunters were not a formidable organization at this time, but even at this early point in history, names such as Smoke and his wrecking crew were spoken of in awe, fear, and reverence. As such group were the heroes of 1,000 hamlets, farms, and traders around the world. It is into this world that our heroes would emerge and begin their path to glory, tragedy, and power beyond the understanding of any involved in those early days. Their actions and victories would see the first of a new breed of divine powers rise, and the beginnings of a long, painful restructuring and eventual advancement of the peoples and powers of the world of Jam'mar towards the state we know them as today. With the groundwork laid and the general state of the world set out, we will begin our exploration of the Age of Valor's beginning events in earnest in our next entry. There, we shall see how from noble but humbled origins, the now Empress of the Gods, Genevieve Nodoker, began as a headstrong and driven adventuring bard, simply seeking a lost brother. Her path to finding that brother would see many years go by and a new age begin, and would also see change in both the world and the fledgling heroine, as well as her allies. So I do hope you will join me as we continue our exploration of the realms and the Age of Valor in our next entry. Thank you as always, my regular visitors, perceptive patrons, and new guests, for both your time and interest in the realms. I look forward to your comments, questions, and most of all, your attendance for our continuing study and exploration of the realms of Jam'mar. Now, until you make your way back to the library for your next entry, by the 9 and 4, be well. Take care of yourselves and each other. If you'd like to contribute to the further exploration and explanation of the realms, please consider leaving a comment, a like, and sharing the video around. I read all the comments and make efforts to reply to each. Thank you for helping to grow the channel, and know I look forward to each and every one of your comments. Other methods of support can be found in the channel's description. Thank you for watching.